hidden in the heart of Cleveland, Ohio's Industrial Valley, is the old Baltimore and Ohio Roundhouse, home to the Midwest Railway Preservation Society. Slumbering inside is a massive steam locomotive that traces its roots back to southeastern Pennsylvania. Currently on a multi-year lease to American Steam Railroad, the engine is nearing the end of a decade-long restoration, bringing it back to life. So how did this behemoth end up over 400 miles away from its home? Hi, I'm Matt, aka Railroad Street. Let's go learn more about the Reading 2100. As the Allies were gaining momentum during World War II, the coal-hauling Reading Company's rail traffic was surging. Wanting to speed up the movement of freight, the railroad began looking at options to replace some of its older, aging steam locomotives. Originally intending to order brand new engines, the War Production Board, on account of prioritizing raw materials for the war, denied the railroad's request. However, as a compromise, the board authorized Reading to either rebuild or modify existing engines. One prime candidate for rebuilding was the railroad's class of 1920s Baldwin I-10SA 280s.
Well, the Reading I-10 SA class were very large 280s. In fact, only the Western Maryland had a bigger 280 consolidation. And just to describe how massive these locomotives were, these 210s, they developed 71,000 pounds of tractive effort. And many people probably watching this program know about the nickel plate Berks, the 765, of course, being one of the most famous ones. And the nickel plate Berks, very capable locomotives, generated 64,100 pounds of tractive effort. So for a 280 to be able to put out 71,000 pounds pretty much states how powerful they actually were and how big they were.
With locomotives now selected, Reading had to figure out what to make them into. The railroad's new president, Revell W. Brown, had been greatly impressed by the Lehigh Valley's modern 484 Northern type locomotives. At his suggestion, Reading began rebuilding the I-10SAs like these 484s. Acting under his instructions, E. Paul Gangwer from Reading's Motive Power Department and design engineers of the Baldwin Locomotive Works began drawing up plans for what became their T1 locomotives.
What was retained from those 280 consolidations really wasn't very much. They reused the firebox, but they did modify it to actually then include thermic siphons and such. And also what was critical was the boiler course right after the firebox. So that would be the third boiler course there with the T1 the way it is now configured. And the reason for that being is up in the steam dome, it is stamped with a number like the VIN on your car. And that is the number that the government tracks for which locomotive that it is. So whether that locomotive is a 280 or a 484 underneath is irrelevant to the government. As long as that stamped dome stays the same, to them, it is still the same locomotive.
In September 1945, locomotive number 2100, formerly numbered 2045, was the first T1 to roll out of the company's Reading, Pennsylvania shop. 29 other T1s, numbered from 2101 to 2129, were later constructed between 1945 and 1947. Unfortunately, the T1s only saw fast freight service for less than a decade as railroads were starting to replace steam locomotives with easier to maintain diesel-electric locomotives.
After the Reading had pretty much wrapped up utilizing steam locomotives on their system, which really started about 1954, and by 56, steam was pretty well waning then on the Reading. Out of the 30 Reading T1s that were constructed and built, there were still 4 that were in relatively good shape. Additionally, the Reading Railroad had a fleet of passenger cars that really were not getting utilized much, especially there on the weekends. So they decided to make it a little extra money and have some excursion trains. And those programs were extremely successful. They ran from 1959 all the way up to 1964, utilizing 3 steam locomotives for operation. Those were 2100, the 2102, and the 2124, and then a locomotive, the 2101, for backup purposes, should any of those 3 not been able to pull the train. A 5th locomotive was also kept, the 2123, for spare parts. And a lot of people don't realize there was a 5th T1 as part of the Rambles, but literally it never ran. It was just picked apart as needed to keep the other locomotives in operation.
After the Rambles were discontinued in 1964, the 5 T1s that Reading kept in service went their separate ways. In 1967, the 2100 and 2101 were both sold to the Striegel Supply and Equipment Corporation, a scrap dealer based out of Baltimore.
Now, the Striegel Scrap Company never had plans to cut them up. They actually tried to sell them as operating locomotives. And in 1975, Ross Rowland was in need of a little shorter locomotive to run here in the Northeast for the American Freedom Train. People may not be aware of that the 4449, the Southern Pacific locomotive, was to pull it throughout the country. But 30 days before the Freedom Train was to make its initial run, Ross Rowland was notified it was too tall to come under the bridges and through the tunnels here east of Chicago. So he only had 30 days to find another steam locomotive and get it operational. So he went down to Striegel and purchased the 2100 and the 2101. The 2101's boiler and firebox were in a little better shape, so she got the nod to be the Freedom Train, with 2100 supplying the spare parts to keep it running over the years. Now, after Ross Rowland was done there with the 2101 due to the fire, which he then exchanged it for the 614 locomotive, that kind of left 2100 without much of a purpose. And thankfully, a gentleman named Richard Kuhn stepped in and purchased the locomotive. Now, many people may not know that name, but they know the company he owned at the time in the 1980s, which was Lionel Trains. He spent almost $1 million of his own money to restore the 2100. And we actually have all the documents on that, so we can read through everything that was done. So a very thorough restoration. Unfortunately, though, where they had planned on running the locomotive through a series of potential Conrail excursions, that manager passed away unexpectedly. So that never came to fruition.
While the 2100 remained dormant, Kuhn donated the engine to the Portage, Ohio Regional Transportation Authority in Kent. Ultimately, the locomotive was too large to operate for plans that Porta had, so in January 1998, it went up for auction and was bought by Tom Paine, Canadian Shortline Railway owner. Paine brought the 2100 to Ontario, where it was to operate passenger excursions between Toronto and Niagara Falls. Those plans eventually fell through. In 2005, it was brought to Tacoma, Washington, where Paine arranged to run excursions over Tacoma Rail's trackage between Freight House Square and Frederickson Industrial Park. The operation, known as the Golden Pacific Railroad, only lasted for 2 months after suffering crippling debt, lawsuits, poor marketing, and 2100 performing poorly because of a botched oil conversion.
Well, the oil conversion that was done there was actually done off a series of, I believe it's Canadian Pacific blueprints. We actually do have a copy of them, but it was actually from a smaller locomotive, a 280. And they weren't exactly followed. Most oil conversions or oil burning locomotives have a pan that sits down below where the grates were, and that pan was never put in, so the flame was higher than what the design, even the other one that had the burner at the rear of the firebox as opposed to at the front, which is how most American designs are, if not all of them. The one that the Canadian Pacific had that was successful was actually done below where the grates would have been. The burner would have been below the floor in the cab. And then the flame would have gone forward, then come back up around, and then again circled back up over arch brick. So there were successful Canadian Pacific designs with the burner in the rear on other types of locomotives, and the blueprint that we had from Tom Paine came from a 280. But of course, when we went to go do the oil conversion, again, we decided to follow then the standard practices that virtually all, if not all, American locomotives were done with at that time.
Ultimately, Paine's ownership of the locomotive ended when one of his business partners issued liens on the 2100 for unpaid debt. In 2007, the engine was put into storage on a siding in Richland, Washington, and sat there for 8 years.
When we received the locomotive and brought it here to Cleveland in 2015, we had every intention of returning it back to coal burning. One of the things Tom Paine, the previous owner, did is he saved all the parts, and which, by the way, we have done the same thing. So the locomotive could, in the future, be converted back to coal. So we retrieved all those parts and started to go down that path because we knew we were going to have to upgrade the oil firing system that he had put in place to enhance it. So with regard to that, we decided to, just switch it back to coal because all the parts are here, and no engineering services need paid for it. It's basically take out what was there before in oil burning and put it back to the coal. Things though changed over the years with regard to burning coal. And what really made us sit up and take notice was several years back, I want to say it was around 2019, the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad needed to put in coal storage and ash storage and have ash abatement set up there at their location in West Virginia. And those are structures and facilities we don't have in place here where we're at the old B&O Roundhouse at the Midwest Railroad Preservation Society. So, and we knew the cost to the Western Maryland Scenic, if I remember right, was about $75,000. So that's a pretty big expense there. And likewise, where we were going to run, many places also don't have those types of facilities or structures in place. So about 3 years ago, I had calculated out as treasurer that based on what other organizations were burning in coal and what their costs were and what we were going to have to do to remediate the ash and get rid of it properly, the best we were going to be able to do was to break even after each trip. And that would be on a good day. Anything else is a loss, and there's no way to financially sustain that. Likewise, some of the railroads that we were going to be going to, again, that didn't have steam operations, were starting to ask, you are going to burn oil, right? In other words, they really weren't wanting the coal and the ash to be present. So at that point then, the decision was made to go ahead and put all of the coal burning parts back in storage so that way they could be used at a future time and not do any more restoration or work on them, which very little had been done up until that point. And then go ahead and get the services of the FMW company, who has expertise in designing and engineering oil firing systems, as well as two of the best in the industry that have operated oil firing systems and done some design work themselves, that being Zach Hall and then Jason Johnson. And with those three experts there, combining all of their engineering and talents and experience together, we know that we have designed an exceptionally great, both not only as far as heating ability to create the power needed, but also efficiency as well. It's one thing to make power, it's another thing to do it efficiently and be cost effective. And to have the three of them come together and design the system we have now in place that has that trough, that has a burner that's designed for the flame, for the Wooten firebox, the air inlets, a damper to adjust that airflow in as well, is really going to be something to be seen. And I know some people, yes, were disappointed in that decision, but at the end of the day, there was going to be no financial way to really run the locomotive. We would have run out of money, bottom line.
On April 3rd and 4th, 2025, after nearly 10 years of dedicated volunteer and professional labor, totaling more than $1.6 million, 2100 returned to steam, though numbered differently. To honor the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, 2100 will be wearing a paint scheme similar to that of what 2101 had during the 1976 Freedom Train. While light at the end of the tunnel is finally visible, more work remains for the engine.
Yeah, at this point right now, based on some pledges we just got, the new number that we'll be posting here on our website is going to be $128,000. $128,000. Basically, we still need about $78,000 to do the test break-in runs, which we are hoping to get done by the end of the year. And then the remaining money really will get into jacketing, lagging, paint work, and then some other things that need purchase like event recorders, speedometer, and a radio, those types of items that then add to the final bill there of about another $50,000. So, but at $128,000, we have the locomotive literally ready to go pull excursions. People say, well, this locomotive should be restored, or let's do this one, or why not that one? Believe me, we all look at these steam locomotives and say, what would be the next great one to do? Well, whether that would be something like a CB&Q Hudson or bring Frisco 1522 back, all definitely worthy candidates. But the key thing is, first and foremost, how's it going to be funded? who's going to step up to the plate and write the big checks. And really, in all honesty, you really need multiple people, 2, 3, maybe 5, that can step up once a year or even more and write that 5-figure or 6-figure check to keep the project moving forward. That's critical. Yes, the $20 donors, $50 donors, $100 donors, that adds up. There's no doubt about it. And go out and get 500 or 1,000 of them if you can. That's a wonderful thing. And really, that is the bulk of how the 2100 has been restored. It's been the small donors. Thankfully, we have had 2 donors that have stepped up to the plate and have written larger 5-figure checks from time to time, which is great. But most of our money coming in is in that $5, $10, $20, $50, $100, $500 frame. So that is a critical and important thing as well.
If you'd like to learn more about the project, donate, or volunteer, visit AmericanSteamRailroad.org. I've also pinned a direct donation link below in the video's description. I hope everyone enjoyed this look at the Reading 2100. For more content like this, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Railroad Street. Thanks for watching.